I read the indictment very carefully. There is no smoking gun.
I've never seen an indictment this messy and sloppy in my life.
This indictment strikes me as an amateurish joke. Frankly, Jack Smith, as special counsel, should be indicted for stupidity. It's that bad.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin here with the Illinois Channel, and I'm joined with Jeff Berkowitz of Public Affairs Television, and we are going to be talking about two of the big stories that have been going on this week. One is the indictment of President Trump on charges. This is not his first indictment, but the latest, and it is conspiracy to defraud the U.S., conspiracy to obstruct official proceedings, obstruction of official proceedings, and conspiracy against rights. And then the other issue that Jeff and I are going to be discussing is concerning what's going on in the Hunter Biden proceedings and evidence and discussions by Hunter Biden's former partner who was up on Capitol Hill this week, and that is Devin Archer. There's a photo from an interview he just did with Tucker Carlson. Devin Archer was a business partner with Hunter Biden, and testified before Congress in a closed session this Monday. So, Jeff, we got a lot on our plate. What are your thoughts so far of what's been popping in these stories?
Well, this indictment, the third indictment of President Trump, is just fundamentally flawed. Even people who agreed somewhat with the second indictment and said that was a serious matter, classified documents, you can argue either way. But now, I mean, people like constitutional scholar, and I call him that, Jonathan Turley, professor from George Washington University, just said, this is just fundamentally flawed. This indictment seems not to understand that the speech they are going after, the actions of Donald Trump they are going after, are constitutionally protected in our First Amendment. Remind people, Congress, First Amendment, 1A, says Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievance. That's the First Amendment. This is constitutionally protected speech. When Donald Trump wants to think about what might have gone wrong and discuss that with his counsel, he has every right in the world, and especially under the First Amendment, to do that. Unlike what the folks at CNN said, oh, well, speech when it's out in the public, but it's in a private room, not so much protected. No, absolutely wrong. So the President of the United States, and if they can go after the President of the United States, which Donald Trump says, and violate his freedom of speech and his freedom of action, they can do it to you. Every person who's watching this show, they can come after you. That's what this indictment is flawed about.
Yeah, I started to say this is not about an obstruction of government proceedings. It is a rape. It is a rape of our judicial system, and I think this is clear. We see this piling on by Democratic prosecutors, by Democratic-run Department of Justice. When the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, appoints a guy like Jack Smith, who put Republican Governor of Virginia, former Governor Bob McDonnell, a couple of years ago, indicted him, and he went to prison for a while, and eventually, on a 9-0 ruling, the Supreme Court overthrew the prosecution of Governor McDonnell and said he had done nothing wrong. This is the background of Jack Smith, who has just brought this indictment against President Trump. He is known to be a pit bull in the arena. This is not the kind of a fair-minded prosecution, in my estimation, based upon what we're seeing. And as you just said, you can't be going after someone because he complained that the election was stolen from him, and then to say that that is against the law when we had Hillary Clinton making the exact same claim in the 2016 election and Nancy Pelosi saying the 2016 election was stolen. Not to mention Stacey Abrams, the Democrat head of the Democratic Party, former in Georgia, when she lost the election for governor. And for 2 years, we had Democrats claiming she had been denied election to governor because of election fraud. So, I mean, this again, it goes to show the partisan nature of this prosecution.
Worse than just partisan, this is a classic example of bait and switch. The Democrats started this even before Smith was there, because this is a January 6th indictment. And the core, as we've all seen on TV, the Democrats say the terrible thing about January 6th was the desecration of the Capitol, the riot, the violence at the Capitol. And most of us thought, with that lead in, they were going to surely go after the president with incitement to riot, with aiding and abetting that riot. No, they didn't do that at all. This indictment doesn't do that one bit. It's all about, as you pointed out, obstruction of an official proceeding, the certification of the votes. And then they come up with conspiracy to fraud, using fraud like nobody has ever used it before. As you know, Terry, fraud in the United States is when you go and take some money from somebody deceitfully, okay? This kind of defraud never been used before, so they kind of try to bootstrap all of those other things that they're not actually indicting for into sort of crazy counts of defrauding the United States, obstructing an official proceeding. He was the president of the United States, Terry. He can go. He can try to influence his vice president and say, "You try to get a pause." Now that can be a defective legal theory. It could be that John Eastman was wrong, but we can't criminalize people for following the advice of their counsel because Jack Smith says it was wrong or CNN says it was wrong.
You know, the other thing, the idea you would have to prove that Trump knew he had been legally defeated and then lied. That's what Smith is alleging, that Trump was lying when he said the election was stolen. Well, how is the government going to prove that Donald Trump didn't believe the election was stolen from him? There's only so many hours. Only so many hours in the day. I have from 2020, December of 2020, some videotapes of hearings, specifically Wisconsin, where we had election judges testifying before the Illinois Channel's counterpart up in Wisconsin, and they were saying how they were denied access to do their job of looking at the ballots, and they were, making. I'm not going to go into all the details. There was the reason I bring this up is there was reasons to say and to think that there was shenanigans going on at different states. So whether you think the election was stolen or not, the point would be that certainly Trump in his own mind would have reason to think and could think that the election was stolen. The government is not going to be able to prove that Trump didn't think that, and then that would kind of invalidates their first point.
But even worse, Terry, even if he wasn't sincere, even if it were a lie, I would say it would still be legal. It would still be constitutional for him to pursue that. There's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that says politicians or anybody else can't tell a lie in the course of legal argument, or half or more of the Congress would be in jail every other day. So it's ludicrous. The whole thing is founded on a bunch of sand that doesn't hold up. It's like a castle that's fading quickly, and it's a castle made of sand that will be ground zero before you know it. So this is not well thought of. It's not an honest indictment. It's not a thoughtful indictment. And worse, it will be. I think if they want to make, and I think Democrats would be a major mistake to make this the indictment they hang their arguments on, because it'll lead the election to be, do we in the United States, as we head toward our 250th birthday, do we believe in freedom of speech? Or do we believe that maybe Jack Smith and Merrick Garland, the Attorney General of the United States, they will determine what's truthful? Okay? I don't think we want to do that.
Let me bring up, you got Jack Smith, again, the special prosecutor bringing these charges against President Trump. I didn't have a chance to create a graphic for this, but let me just put this in the context with the idea of an open question. is the Biden Department of Justice bringing these indictments against Trump to cover up their own misdealings by the president and allegedly in taking bribes from the communist Chinese through his son. Jack Smith has brought 3 indictments. On June the 7th, the FBI released documents to Congress, the 1023, alleging a $10 million bribe from Burisma in the Ukraine. Guess what happened the next day, Jeff? Jack Smith indicts Trump in the Mar-a-Lago's case. On July 26th, so that was last week, Hunter Biden goes to court and gets a rejection of the sweetheart deal. The judge throws out the sweetheart deal the Department of Justice was giving him. And what happens the next day, Jeff? Our old friend Jack Smith indicts the president on more charges in the Mar-a-Lago case. And now, this July 31st, Hunter Biden's former business partner, as we mentioned, Devin Archer, testifies behind closed doors on Monday of this week. And guess what happens? The next day, yesterday, July 1, Jack Smith indicts Trump again, this time on January 6. So in every instance, when there was a major headline against the Bidens, Jack Smith indicts Trump the following day. How many guesses do you think you would say that Jack Smith was holding on to these indictments and then putting a stamp on them right so he could bring them out and take away the news cycle of the damaging information coming out against the Bidens?
Well, the point you make is a good one, but the overriding complaint here is that this Department of Justice, under Merrick Garland, who was up to be appointed, he was actually nominated to be on the Supreme Court. It didn't go forward. But this guy, who could have been on the Supreme Court, has basically sullied the name of this country in the way he's conducted himself as Attorney General of the United States. For example, this indictment omits what we know is the case. Trump said, go to the Capitol peacefully. No mention of that. Trump said, only count the electors who have been lawfully slated. Jack Smith omits that. Trump's talked about them marching soon to the Capitol to peacefully, patriotically protest. Look at the tape. The words are there, but they're not in the indictment. Why not be fair, Jack Smith? Why not show the comments you're making, the quotes you're saying in context? I mean, and the worst thing again, now stop, the indictment accuses Trump of spreading disinformation. But that's all a part of the First Amendment. It's not for CNN and MSNBC and Merrick Garland even to decide what's truthful information and what's disinformation. It's for the First Amendment. This is the political process. And if anything, if this should have been anywhere, it should have been an impeachment. That's what the Constitution provides. If you want to do something, be a part of the political process, impeachment's a part of that, go ahead with that. Don't use your Department of Justice to weaponize your Department of Justice and go after one of your opponents, your major opponent, running for president of the United States against the current president. That is so wrong.
Look, and here's the other thing which President Trump said in a speech brought this out. And to follow up on what I was just saying, that it seems that Jack Smith is using these indictments to cover up the breaking news about alleged briberies going to the Biden family. Now, what did he just indict President Trump for? January 6th. Well, Jeff, I think January 6th was like 2.5 years ago, wasn't it? 2021. Why do we get an indictment of January 6, 2021 coming out in the middle of 2023? I mean, did it really take 2.5 years to put that paperwork together and to interview people? Or, again, would a common sense person go, this looks like he's just trying to cover the tracks of all this information coming out about how the Bidens have had 20 LLCs and have been taking money in from the Chinese, the Romanians, and the Russians, And now we have Devin Archer appearing, as I said, on Capitol Hill. I'm sure we'll be hearing more from Devin Archer, and that transcript, which you and I will probably be discussing in a future discussion, that transcript of what Devin Archer said has not been released, but we'll talk about it when it is.
We'll remind people we're taping this show on
August 2nd.
on August 2nd, 2023. So January 6th, 2023, that's almost 3 years ago. And what is this special counsel, Jack Smith, doing? He wants to rush through, if he can, all three indictments. He'd like to rush through this one because he thinks that's the sexiest. So he took almost 3 years. And why don't we give the Trump administration, or Donald Trump, if you will, give him, what, a month or 6 weeks to prepare and then get this done in 2 months and shorten the trial? Because this is, Terry, they're accusing Trump of interference with an election. No, these indictments, and this indictment in particular, is interference with the 2024 election. These things that these folks are talking about, they should be decided by the American electorate. If they think Trump was dishonest, if they think Trump was deceitful, put that on the ballot, and you can decide that when you vote for Donald Trump or the Republican, any other Republican who's running as the nominee for President of the United States, and any Democrat who's running, whether even if it isn't Joe Biden. Let's make the election about these issues. Let's make the election about the issue you just mentioned, the China military strength, economic strength. Was COVID handled properly by DeSantis or somebody else? All right, but these are all inflation. These are all political issues. This is what this country is supposed to deal with, not the judiciary, not the Attorney General of the United States.
Well, I agree with you 100%. Look, what did we see throughout the Trump presidency? Trump was dogged by the Democrats that kept bringing up allegations which all proved to be inaccurate, that he was colluding with the Russians. They tried to bring that up during the campaign of 2016, and then they pursued that throughout half of his time in office. They impeached him twice. We see the modus operandi of the Democratic Party was to use legal means to go after Trump and disrupt his campaign and to disrupt his presidency. That's what we see now happening with this use of the Department of Justice. And as you say, they're looking to tie him up into legal knots during the campaign of 2024. As we are having this discussion, Jeff, this is New York Times just came out, Trump is very definitely, this is a nationwide poll, leading and most likely to be the Republican nominee. As you see there, he's got a 37% lead over number 2, Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida. So Trump is likely to be the nominee, and yet we have this going after him and these allegations that he has defrauded the government by lying. Well, let me just remind you, and here's a tweet by an insightful tweeter, Greg Price. He says, remember that the 51 former intelligence officials were on the record during the 2020 elections saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. But we later learned that not only was the laptop in fact real, but they did it in coordination with the Joe Biden campaign. And a few of them even admitted that they did that because they wanted Joe Biden to win. So they were lying about it being Russian disinformation. And as Mr. Price points out, not only have none of them been charged with conspiracy to defraud the United States, but all of them to this day still have their clearances for security purposes.
Well, the issue that will be coming up, and I think we'll probably see it fairly shortly, is can Donald Trump, the defendant in this indictment, can he get these challenges that you and I are talking about? They're challenges to this indictment on the First Amendment. And can they go to the appellate courts initially they can ask for, they can raise it on the district court level, and then get a quick appeal to the circuit court level, and maybe get an expedited appeal to the Supreme Court. That's all very hard because if people are familiar with the legal process, Usually these appeals that I'm talking about, they'd be known as an interlocutory appeal. That would be something that you couldn't appeal until you got the judgment. But Trump doesn't want to wait till there's a judgment. That will interfere with the election even more. So he would like to get the courts to decide this. This could be viewed as a motion to dismiss, assuming everything that the indictment says is true in terms of the legal arguments. I mean, in terms of the facts and so forth, they're not, but assuming they are, would this be a colorable complaint? Or would it be, as I contend, an infringement on the First Amendment, and you can't bar these actions, and therefore the whole complaint should be dismissed? And this thing, then somebody can appeal that judgment to the appellate court, to the Supreme Court. And I think, I don't know if you could do those on the other two indictments, but you could certainly do it here. And the last thing I'll say is, you just pointed out about the election and the Republican primary and where it stands. It may be that Trump wins that. He's certainly far ahead now. But it may be that Ron DeSantis, in particular, with 17% and 7 months to debate these issues, could become the candidate. He might be the better general election candidate. But with this stuff all going on, as you know, Trump sucks all of the oxygen out of the room, and we're not going to get a debate on the issues in the Republican primary, or even perhaps in the Democratic primary. As you and I contend, it won't be Joe Biden. It'll be Pritzker and Gavin Newsom if things go the way we say. Let's let that political process go ahead unimpeded by these indictments.
Let me run a bit of a speech here by Senator J.D. Vance, who voices much of the frustration that you and I are saying, and much of the frustration of a lot of Americans who are witnessing what certainly appears to many to be this use of the Department of Justice for political purposes.
Problem is the fact that the Department of Justice has been corrupted under the Biden administration. Yesterday, the plea deal that the Department of Justice cut with Hunter Biden fell apart under minimal scrutiny from the federal judge in that case. That is how the Department of Justice treats the Democratic leadership in this country, with kid gloves, even in the face of very serious corruption. Now, let's ask ourselves how they treat the former Republican president in the face of a classified document scandal where literally the claim is that the President of the United States mishandled the documents of his own administration. Now, nobody doubts that President Trump had the right to declassify the documents at issue in this case. The argument is that he didn't, and therefore they want to throw him in jail. Is that really what we're doing at the height of a presidential campaign, is trying to throw the former president in jail, the likely leader of the opposition in prison, because he didn't cross the T's and dot the I's on the classification or declassification process? This is a ridiculous scandal in our entire country.
So Senator J.D. Vance, new senator from Ohio, and again, trying to point out that says, doesn't seem like we're having equal justice under the law when you look at the two applications. Let me bring up, Jeff, a reminder. Last week I brought up a graphic that Hunter Biden, this is from the New York Post, an article by Miranda Devine, Hunter Biden put then Vice President Dad Joe on the phone with business associates at least 24 times, according to ex-partner Devon Archer. And I can say that this just today, shortly before we started recording, Tucker Carlson, who is now putting out videos on Twitter, released what he labeled part one of an interview that ran about 12 minutes or so with Devon Archer. And Devon Archer did confirm in that interview that Hunter did put Joe Biden in the middle of business meetings on the speakerphone, his cell phone, put Joe Biden on with these business associates. And remember that Joe Biden had been insisting all along that he never talked at all business with his son. Now we know that that was a lie.
Right, and this testimony or deposition, however you want to call it, by Devon Archer, that occurred on July 31. And we'll get a transcript of that, I assume, in a day or two, so we can discuss it based not on speculation, but on the transcript, and then we'll see if they go forward with a hearing. But basically, what was predicted, based on what we heard from both a Democrat and Republicans, because this was a bipartisan interview, if you want to put it, and the Democrat has conceded, yes, Archer said over the course of 10 years, there are at least 20 phone calls or other ways in which Biden interceded and let himself be shown off to enhance the brand of his son and his businesses, showing that his son could Hunter Biden, he could influence President Joe Biden, whether it's China, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Romania, and so that's a really key point, and that's why they conceded the Democrats prior to Devin Archer being interviewed, because they knew what he was going to say, and they knew that Biden had been lying. Talk about lying! We're going to throw him in jail for the last 2 or 3 years at least, when he was saying, "I never talked about business." Well, I don't care whether he talked about weather or what he talked about. When he goes on a speakerphone and he knows the business colleagues are around there, and Hunter, and he is enhancing the brand of his son, and they're going to give him money because they know his son can influence him. What the hell? Were you a liar, President Biden? Were you a liar?
We know
you
Joe
compromised?
Biden has
These are
lied
the questions to be
repeatedly.
asked.
I mean, he's lied throughout his career. He lied about his place in law school. He has a record over the years of
He
telling.
lied about his background. He just
Yeah,
stole somebody
yeah.
else's resume,
He's li-
in England, and took that as his own bio.
Neil
It wasn't
Kinnock.
even
He stole
smart
Neil
lying.
Kinnock's speech when he announced for president in '88 and read it word for word. A guy who was a speech by a politician from England, he used it as his own announcement. And he lied, as you say, lied about, he said he was at the top of his law school class. He wasn't.
Well, Terry, if it was a sincere lie, I guess it was okay and that it was constitutional. What a bunch of crock, okay? No, this wouldn't even pass on a con law exam if somebody said, "Could you make this argument?" Absolutely not. But you watch CNN go around the table with prosecutors, so-called former prosecutors from the Southern District of New York, with Caitlin Collins, 31-year-old whiz kid who didn't spend a day in law school. She was telling just an hour ago when I was watching this, she was telling the current counsel for Trump, what's the law? Oh my God. Oh my God. That's what I have to say. Like totally wrong. Like
Look,
totally.
Jeff and I are not saying that you should be voting for Trump. What we are saying is what journalists should be doing, pointing out really irregular happenings within government. Poor indictments. This idea that the Department of Justice tried to settle a sweetheart deal with Hunter Biden when he went to court last week, and the judge threw that out because she goes, "This is a joke." And when asked the lawyers from the Department of Justice, "Have you ever seen any kind of a deal like this before?" they had to admit, no, they're not. So all of these indictments against Trump by the Department of Justice are really looking as if an overt attempt to tie up the presidential candidacy of Donald Trump and, frankly, to be interfering with the people's right to have a fair and free election. And before we close out, Jeff, let's take a look at where Biden is. Biden himself is not swimming happily in the polls. Here, a recent New York Times poll of 6 states, and we see, although he leads other potential Democrats, his highest number in Michigan is 30%. So he is not getting the kind of support that one would think he would be getting from Democratic voters at this stage in the election.
Well, I got to just say, we've talked about the Attorney General Merrick Garland, and very briefly, when he was up for the Supreme Court nomination, and maybe it was a hardball process that denied it a hearing, maybe, but nevertheless, he sullied his own reputation because I don't think his heart is in handling the matters the way Jack Smith is. But there's enormous pressure on him to go along with this and be political. And so now it's been the most political attorney generals running that office since the beginning.
Yeah, a lot of people are.
And
A
it's
lot
sad
of people are
because
saying
Merrick
that.
Garland
We're going to
is way
have to
better
wrap
than that.
up, but folks, as always, tell us what your thoughts are. Are Jeff and I right? Do you agree with these indictments? Do you disagree with them? Let us know, and Jeff will say goodbye until next time.